Good morning, everybody. My name is Meghan Murphy, and I'm the Schwarzman Fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute. And today I'm moderating a conversation, The State of Myanmar's Civil War, Military Dynamics, and ASEAN's Ongoing Dilemma. The Myanmar Civil War, which in its current iteration was triggered by a February 2021 military coup against the democratically elected government, will be approaching its fifth year. The war has had an estimated death toll of 75,000, with over 6,000 civilian deaths, and it's impacted its neighboring countries like Thailand, Bangladesh, and China as refugees flee across Myanmar's borders, and there's been a major uptick in transnational crime through scam centers and drug trade. The war has also tested the ability of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, also called ASEAN, to identify conflict solutions or enforce a cessation in the fighting. Moreover, in an era that is seeing the United States' role in addressing global conflicts change rapidly, questions emerge as to whether America will be part of the solution in Myanmar. So today we've gathered a panel of three experts to answer questions about the ongoing domestic and international implications of Myanmar's war. As a reminder to those who are listening in, you can submit questions to our panelists to be asked at the end of the session via the Q&A box on Zoom. So we have three great panelists today. Ambassador Derek Mitchell is with us. He's a senior advisor to the president in the Asia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Before that, from 2011 to 2016, he served as the U.S. Special Envoy and then ambassador to Myanmar, also called Burma. He was the first from the United States in 22 years and served during a period of great transition. Dr. Thitinan Pongsudhirak is a professor of international relations at Chulalongkorn University's Faculty of Political Science, and a senior fellow at its Institute of Security and International Studies in Bangkok. And as he told us before the session, he is in Kuala Lumpur preparing for a plenary session on Myanmar tomorrow, so staying very involved in dealing with the conflict. Finally, we have Nyantha Maw Lin, who's the principal of Anagat Initiatives, think tank he founded to foster policy dialogue. Nyantha has, in the aftermath of the 2021 coup, provided strategic and high-impact counsel to political stakeholders. He's also an Asia 21 Fellow in the class of 2024, a group founded by the Asia Society. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to have our first question taken by Nyantha. So Julie Bishop, who is the UN Special Envoy to Myanmar, said last week that Myanmar is on the path to self-destruction if there's no end to the violence. I'd like to ask you if you agree with this sentiment, and do you think that there will be self-destruction anytime soon? Do you believe that the regime will fall, or what will that look like?
Thank you, Meghan, and thank you to the Asia Society for having me here. If the Madam Special Envoy means the bureaucratic state of Myanmar that for the past 60 plus years has been dominated and controlled by the Myanmar armed forces, that itself has never been able to achieve a monopoly over power and the means of violence in its dominion, and that itself has fallen prey to the endemic corruption and wholesale parasitism of its officer class, then yes, this is very much a situation we're looking at. The military for the past 60 years, and more recently since the coup, has failed to provide a compelling vision and a sense of a new social contract for its diverse peoples and communities. This collapse, or this risk of collapse, if you will be tragically costly. You can imagine how much more suffering can be wrought on a people that have already faced persecution, are facing a multi-actor war, are dealing with economic calamity, natural disaster, including a very recent and tremendously destructive earthquake, and most importantly for this conversation, international apathy. To the Special Envoy's question, to end the violence is absolutely the answer, but I think it's just as much how we end the violence that is important. We've seen 4 years of just very graphic brutality by a regime that has shown no compunction in its actions. And at the same time, on the part of an opposition, of a multi-ethnic, multi-pronged opposition, the rapid and unprecedented buildup of an armed resistance that is building on the infrastructure of legacy armed organizations, and that is presenting a very serious challenge to the military, that has taken regional commands, that has taken territory. There are multiple sides, there are multiple actors with serious power now. It's not just the military. And how we achieve an end to the violence, it has to be a comprehensive political solution. It is, to me, something that is still possible. It will require some very deft threading of multiple actors. The issue is there enough international attention and interest and commitment to seeing it through? I'll stop there.
Just to follow up, to sort of get a sense of what's going on in Myanmar, it's a very complex patchwork of the military junta, armed ethnic groups, many other militant organizations across Myanmar. So maybe you could give us a bit of an overview of the state of play right now. What groups do you think have gained significant amount of power? And what losses have the junta faced in 2025 compared to past years?
I mean, the figures are out there. You've seen the regime in the past 4 years rapidly lose control of, depending on you ask, somewhere around 60+% of the territory in the country. Now, that figure doesn't mean much until you take a look at what's actually happening on the ground. And this, I think, narrative that there are multiple actors is true, but it also perhaps underestimates or undercuts the extent to which there is coordination, the extent to which there is cooperation, and the extent to which there is ongoing dialogue, even between resistance actors in the midst of war and resistance. The situation is one where if this war were to continue, if this state of political and economic instability were to continue, you can look at places like northern Kachin, you can look at places like Karenni State to the east of the country towards the Thai border, or Karen State, where for the past 4 years, if not before, you now have had resistance organizations carve out control away from the military, but also build up from the bottom, the beginnings of provisional governance. I've had the opportunity to visit many parts of now what is resistance-controlled territory. And what you see are an incredibly dedicated set of actors that at a minimum are putting in efforts to ensure basic health services, education services are able to continue. This is not always possible without international assistance. And therefore, actually, the bulk of the support for the resistance has come from Myanmar's diaspora, has come from inside Myanmar itself. And this can be the picture of what protraction in Myanmar looks like, where you have a regime at the center that has gradually eroding control over the country, that is dealing with a much more expensive infrastructure, that has severe leadership challenges. If you talk to people in Naypyidaw, in thinking of possible trajectories out of this crisis, while on the peripheries of the country, and the peripheries are no longer peripheries given the size of resistance control that has taken place in 4 years, these areas become the actors in these areas become serious political dialogue partners for neighboring countries. If you want to deal with cross-border movement of people, of goods, of dealing with the potential spread of disease, your counterpart isn't necessarily sitting in Naypyidaw, right? If you want to deliver humanitarian assistance to Sagaing, for example, right in the center of the country, that recently, as I mentioned, was severely affected by the earthquake, the will, but also the means of delivering humanitarian relief has actually come from non-military, non-regime actors. And this can become, it's not a solution, but it can become a dynamic that settles in. Now, of course, we've seen in the past 6 to 9 months, the regime also benefit from increased support from longstanding allies of his, including Russia and other countries. But surprisingly, also, I would say China. And China, for the first 3, maybe 4 years of this crisis, has played a very, I would say, has probably shifted its strategy at least 3 or 4 times. But more recently, it seems to have made the decision that the best chances for China in ensuring some modicum of stability would be in working with the regime. But none of this is a guarantee, and none of this is the kind of comprehensive political solution that the country needs. And I think this is all the more important that we think of how the international community, in face of so many other ongoing crises and issues around the world, also takes note of what's happening in Myanmar.
Hey, thank you so much. And we'll certainly return to the role of China as well as other international actors. But for now, I'll turn to Ambassador Mitchell. So you served as U.S. Ambassador to Myanmar during a very different period, a more peaceful time and a time of political transition. But now, from your vantage point, how would you characterize the current state of the civil war? Who's gaining ground and why?
Well, thank you, Megan. Thank you for asking me to join this. It's good to see good friends on the screen here. It's too bad we can't be in the same place at the same time, but technology allows us to congregate here. I associate myself with what Nyantha said about the overall trajectory of the Civil War. It seems to me clear that the military is on the defensive. It's reactive to what's going on by the ethnic armed organizations. The turning point for those who know Myanmar recent history was the Operation 1027 in 2023, the consortium of 3 ethnic armed organizations that overran over time, took some time to do it, but overran Lazio and the Northeast Command. The first time a military command was actually overrun. Since then, the Arakan Army have overrun the Western Command. So you have right now, things happening all over the country. If you look at the IISS conflict map, you see dots all over the place. The Civil War is happening all over the country. So it's all localized, but it's also quite national. You see the Kachin in the north, as Nyantha talked about. They've taken over the Jade, Debakant, the Jade areas. They've taken over border areas where rare earth metals are being mined. They're moving into northern Shan State. They're moving even into Sagaing. The consortium that took over Lazio was on its way to Mandalay, but was stopped, and we can get to that, I'm sure, later. In fact, I'll mention in a moment what's going on here. But the AA in the West have taken over virtually all of Rakhine State, even parts of Chin State. 14 of 17, I think, provinces or townships in Rakhine are now taken by the AA. All but 3 are taken by the Chin in Chin State. So the periphery, as Nyantha said, is being taken by the ethnic organizations, which gives a kind of bottom-up federalism that's going on from outside in. Now you can really see, you can get a sense of how the military is struggling by three components here. One is the conscription that's going on. The fact that they are conscripting young men and young women into the army shows that they are desperate to get people into the fold, and that they're losing. The fact that they're trying to regain some major cities, they're trying to regain territory, and they're having to conscript young people, and that leads to widespread corruption and all kinds of other vices. That is evidence. Second piece of evidence is the fact that they're taking a lot of the fight by air. They're using the airplanes from Russia, from China, to attack from the air, because on the ground they're getting wiped out, or they're not doing very well by ground. And third, which is what Nyantha mentioned at the end, and we'll get to, I guess, in the next part of the discussion, is the issue of China. Is the fact that the junta is turning to China for help, that they are becoming more and more reliant on the Chinese to have the special envoy of China pulling the ethnic armed organizations back, to have them retreat from Lazio, to have to push the TNLA to give back towns. All of this is astounding for a Myanmar government and Myanmar military who does not trust the Chinese. And I saw that firsthand, and I heard that firsthand, when I was in country, that they view the Chinese as essentially fundamentally contrary to their sovereignty and attacking their sovereignty. So the fact that you have conscription, attacks from the air, and how turning to China for their defense against the EAOs tells you all you need to know about the course of the war so far.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that overview and the things that we can look to see that the junta is struggling. So I'll now turn to Dr. Pongsudhirak. So given that framing and the developments on the ground, resistance gains in part of the country, junta struggling in other parts, how has that affected regional perceptions of the war? And are any Southeast Asian states accepting the idea of a post-junta future?
Thank you, Meghan, and hello to everyone, also to Derek and Nyantha. I mean, the regional response has been flustered. After the coup in February 2021, and I think we have to also recognize, Meghan, that the global media space is crowded. I mean, the headlines are dominated by crises elsewhere, understandably. Israel, Iran, Russia, Ukraine. The U.S. has domestic issues. We have a lot of crises in the world. So Myanmar has been marginalized. Now, I would say that the importance of Myanmar, paying attention to it, is that Myanmar may be marginalized, but Myanmar could come to you, which means that the consequences, the detrimental effects of the Myanmar civil war could create a cesspool of drugs and crimes coming out of this country to the regions, but also internationally. So it could come to you. And then in addition to that, in case people in Washington want to pay attention to Myanmar and they say why, Myanmar is the third largest producer of rare earth minerals. The Chinese rare earths, a lot of that come from Myanmar, from the mines in northern Myanmar. So it's something that maybe President Trump and Trump administration may want to pay attention if they want to kind of impede China's belligerence, rivalry, competition, and also the other major players like Russia and so on. I mean, a lot of these players are in Myanmar, but the U.S. has decided to pull back and to withdraw funding from AID, from a lot of the programs in Myanmar, and basically gone missing. The U.S. gone missing in Myanmar, and this is understandable from the Trump administration, but they should know that Myanmar offers a lot of interest for the U.S. as well. For the region, the neighborhood, I mean, I'm in Kuala Lumpur now at a think tank conference. The Asia Pacific Roundtable is a track 2, parallels the Shangri-La Dialogue, is hosted by ISIS Malaysia Institute of Strategic International Studies, Malaysia. And, several hundred scholars, practitioners here. And Myanmar is a plenary session tomorrow. I'm not on a session, but I'm in another session. But a lot of people will pay attention. This is the number one thorniest, sticking point of ASEAN, the Myanmar crisis, because it's become intractable, problematic, and it's Myanmar is not just any country. It straddles South Asia and Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Myanmar is rich in resources. And what's happened in Myanmar is that there's been a decade of opening, of promise, of economic reform, political liberalization, development progress. That has basically been unplugged by the military with the coup in February 2021. And this is a conundrum for ASEAN, the Southeast Asian organization here, right? Because how can you have a member, this is a 10-member states club, one member has a civil war and ASEAN has not been able to do anything about it. It makes ASEAN look bad. And ASEAN came up with a 5-point consensus in April 2021. And that has not been implemented because the junta leader, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, has basically balked and betrayed that agreement that he signed on to. So along the way, it's really remarkable, extraordinary. What we've seen in Myanmar is that there has been a grassroots uprising, armed, trained by the People's Defense Force, fanning out across the country, really fighting for their country to get their country back. I mean, basically, the decade of promise has been stolen from them. So this is something, I think I find it very extraordinary. It hasn't happened in Thailand. It hasn't happened in most other countries. How can you have these young people picking up arms, rudimentary arms initially, putting their lives on the line, being killed and shot and maimed? But yet, this is what they're doing. They're keeping on with it. And then you have the National Unity Government. I think I have to say that the National Unity Government, the NUG, has to really step up. I mean, they're very weak. General Min Aung Hlaing has a staying power, and he's been propped up. It's been mentioned by both Nyantha and Ambassador Mitchell that China is propping up the Min Aung Hlaing, the SAC, the State Administration Council, because China has to prop it up. China cannot have a vacuum in Myanmar. China has, vast interests, workers, natural gas pipelines, lots and lots of mines, including rare earth minerals. The Jokpyu port, all kinds of energy resources. Also the outlet, the channel to the sea, to the Indian Ocean. So China's been banking on Myanmar as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, the corridor. So China is propping up this regime. So the US is out of action. India is in it somewhere. Thailand is very concerned because there are more and more Myanmar nationals, Myanmar people leaving Myanmar, especially young people, to come and work in Thailand. So over 5 million now, and more will come. So Thailand has to also deal with the drugs, the trafficking, the scam centers, all these detrimental, all these vices and crimes coming out of Myanmar along the border, very long border, 2,400 kilometers. So for Thailand, it's a terrible situation. They would like to have I think Thailand would like to have a peaceful border. India as well. China has to take over northern parts of Myanmar because of its interests. The US is out. Russia is very opportunistic, of course. It's a player there. It's also supporting, not propping up, but supporting the SAC, the military junta. ASEAN is really kind of been outmaneuvered by Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, and also, ASEAN has got its hands full with other crises, South China Sea, the Philippines, and the latest, the Cambodian-Thai border dispute now. But I think that for ASEAN, still, the Myanmar crisis is the number one on the agenda. They have tried something which is novel, unprecedented in ASEAN, which is that they have prevented General Min Aung Hlaing from attending the ASEAN summits. And this is unprecedented because it's a kind of a sanction against Min Aung Hlaing. It doesn't go all the way, only him, only the leadership of the military. But moving forward, basically, all the border states now are not in control, not under control of the military. They only control the hinterland. And as Nyantha mentioned, they control maybe 40%, a little bit more maybe, but they're losing ground by the day. So, the situation here, there's going to be a different kind of Myanmar emerging. And what kind of Myanmar emerging will be dependent on, of course, China, ASEAN, but, maybe the US, I hope. But, within Myanmar, it's very clear what the people want. People, the vast majority from the election in November 2020, they want a promise, they want a new, better future. They want more reform, more progress, and they've been robbed of that. So I think they're going to keep fighting, and we have a kind of a duty and interest to help them and support them.
Great. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive overview. And I appreciate you bringing up, sort of the inherent struggle of young people who risk so much to fight for a dream of democracy that has existed for a century in the making in Myanmar. So to transition now away from solely looking at the domestic and what we've touched on, the role of China, and we'll also talk a bit about the United States. So China has a complex relationship with groups in Myanmar, maintaining dual track engagement, both by backing the junta, but engaging as well with resistance groups in Myanmar, given their apparent greenlighting of the Three Brotherhood Alliance's offensive in 2023, which Ambassador Mitchell brought up. But China's support for the junta has certainly increased. And as our speakers have mentioned, the junta is becoming more reliable on China. So I'll ask Nyantha now, how have ethnic armed organizations, PDFs, and the broader public responded to China's increased involvement supporting the Tatmadaw? And would you consider anti-Chinese sentiment a significant political force amongst Myanmar's populace?
On the first question, China is an unavoidable force for Myanmar. It is a neighbor. It is the largest neighbor. It's the most politically and economically significant actor in the region. And Myanmar, I think, even before the age of Belt and Road initiatives under Xi Jinping, had already gone through, I think, a very similar experience and sort of a proto or quasi form of a BRI style engagement by past Chinese administrations, and significantly under military rule, under previous periods of military rule in Myanmar. So there is a public, I think there's always been a sense of discomfort with dependency, both at the level of political and military elites, as Ambassador Mitchell alluded to, but also I think grievances at the level of a population that had seen large-scale Chinese infrastructure projects, large-scale Chinese trade dependencies for Burmese agriculture and other, primary industries, really be dependent on a single market. And in the post-coup environment that we've seen over the past 4 years, this most recent turn, I think, will only aggravate that relationship. Now, at the level of resistance actors, no one has any delusions about how important China is, that China will always be a neighbor for Myanmar and will be a neighbor that any future administration, political actors, politicos of note will have to deal with and will have to build relations with. The question is how you shift this most recent change in China's posture, which again, I would say only became apparent after perhaps September of last year, when very clearly it had decided to, number one, back the regime's plans for what we all clearly recognize as fraudulent elections, but also with clear indications of financial and other material support for Naypyidaw. And this is going to further destabilize perhaps the sentiment and the mood towards China. The question is whether China is, if you look at a lot of the narrative, if you look at a lot of the messaging from the opposition, from the resistance, quite rightly so, the question raised is this an actual solution? Is this a sustainable, rigorous, durable solution for Myanmar, for China to back Naypyidaw? And to that point, the argument is that this is a regime that has worn out its welcome. It's not the first time the military, has really mismanaged and mistreated an entire people. And in this current context, unlike previous points of tension between the population of the country and the military, you actually have an armed resistance, as Jay and Ambassador Mitchell pointed out, that has gained significant ground against the military. The military has lost a regional command, is on the verge of losing possibly at least one or two more on the west in Rakhine through the efforts of the Arakan Army and its affiliates, in the north in Kachin through the efforts of the KIA, the NUG, and the PDFs there, as well as their other affiliates. And never has the military, I would say, come under this level of pressure. So why is China backing Naypyidaw now? I think there needs to be a better understanding of that. I think from China's perspective, there's a fear that a collapse at the center will prove much more disastrous for the country. I think that perspective is understandable, but it's also misguided. If anything, the cause of instability, past and present, is coming from Naypyidaw, is coming from the regime. Number one. Number two, it's also one of the things we have to grapple with is whether China is actually interested in a a more durable solution, right? And this is a question that I don't think the Burmese resistance and opposition has come to terms with. I would argue China is not under any illusions about the regime and its fragility, about its potential as a long-term partner. The military has never been friendly towards China, as Ambassador Mitchell has pointed out. And particularly this commander-in-chief has been a thorn in the side of China. China is not happy at all with Mai Online, has not been happy with the coup and everything that has followed. But for China, perhaps the question is not to find a solution. Maybe China is not interested in a solution. Maybe China has come to an intermediate assessment that there are no immediate solutions, and therefore what is a possible holding pattern or what is potentially disruptive enough to the current dynamic that perhaps out of which there might be, once the pieces hopefully resettle, perhaps there is a new path forward. My guess is that is what the thinking is in Beijing. And just a quick note, the thinking on Myanmar is coming more and more out of Beijing. The problem, even with that thinking right now, that if China is assuming there is no immediate chance at a more durable and comprehensive solution, and this is just anything but the current situation kind of a move, even that can stand to be quite destabilizing. The regime's planned this election. We have no illusions that it is going to be either free or fair. That's not the point. The point is that it can prove to be a trigger for more violence. It continues to press the point that a regime that is losing territory, that is losing ground, that is losing militarily against an emergent armed resistance movement, still thinks it can somehow unilaterally shape the political trajectory of the country at its will. That's no longer the dynamic, right? So you have a question of the competence of leadership, whether there is any serious reflection on what the available options are for Naypyidaw. And to back that kind of irrationality, I think, should be something that China also revisits. China, as I mentioned, to me, has changed its posture in Myanmar since the coup at least 3 times that I can identify. I'm sure it can always change its position yet again.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Staying on China, to turn to you, Dr. Pongsudhirak. China's strategy in Myanmar, where it's an enforcer, an investor, an arms supplier, where it engages with different forces and in many different ways. Do you see Myanmar as a test case for future regional interventions or future conflicts, including those that would impact other Southeast Asian states?
What do you mean, like China intervening, other players intervening in Southeast Asian countries?
Just in the sense where, like, China's sort of complex role in the conflict in Myanmar, do you see any of its actions there being applicable to potential other conflicts in Southeast Asia? You brought up China Sea, other things like that.
Okay, I see what you mean. China adapts, and China does what it has to maintain and promote its interests. So different countries come with different imperatives for China. I mean, for Laos, you can see that Laos is heavily indebted to China. Some people see Laos as a kind of a vassal client state of China, Cambodia to an extent. And China deals with other countries differently. So Philippines confronting China, very antagonistic, in fact, confrontational. And you have, other countries. China has a way of dealing with Thailand. I think China sees Thailand as a pivotal country in Southeast Asia. If China can get Thailand into its orbit, that's the strategic inflection point for China. For Myanmar, China has to do more because of the situation on the ground. The military is losing. China cannot really allow or afford for the military to lose, the SAC to lose, and not ensure that what comes in the military's place is not favorable to China. So I think China is engaging with the ethnic armies, certainly in northern states, Kachin, Shan, especially. And in fact, I mean, China has been basically propping up the SAC by getting the ethnic armies out in order for the military to kind of return and maintain some control. In other areas in the West and Rakhine, less so. So I think Myanmar for China is a big headache. I think that they are not a big fan of the coup, but once the coup happened, they had to cope and they had to adapt. And the way they have adapted is that they have to secure their interests. So they're very interventionist, especially in the north. And whatever happens, China has to make sure that whoever is in power would have to be favorable to China's interests. It cannot be detrimental, it cannot undermine China's interests. And this is why I think NUG really has to step up, including the leadership, especially to assure, China, but also ASEAN to really deal and play on the same level ground as Min Aung Hlaing. Because when countries like in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, they look at the NUG, there's no one to engage with, really. I mean, who is the president? I mean, hardly seen. The foreign minister is seen, but, not really visible. This is the time they need to be conspicuous. They need to be assertive. They need to really step it up to the Min Aung Hlaing, to the SAC. And I think if they do that, they can present themselves as a viable alternative to the SAC. We're not seeing that yet. They can convince China, if the NUG has its act together with the ethnic armies, the EAOs, and also the PDF already is the PDF really is the unsung heroes of this civil war. I mean, we can call it internal conflict, we can call it revolution. Basically, it's a mass revolt, uprising by the vast majority of the Myanmar people against the military to take their country back. So, I think the onus is really on the opposition alliance, the resistance coalition, to really step up and convince all players in around the region and beyond that they are a force to be reckoned with collectively, that they can provide a future for Myanmar. The SAC is not the way forward, and I think people know that. They just don't know what can come up in its place, and China doesn't know. So if you can provide an alternative, even China could be convinced.
Thank you so much. So to turn now to another superpower that is now less involved, Ambassador Mitchell, during your time as U.S. Ambassador to Burma, the United States played a leading role in supporting Myanmar's democratic opening, and past administrations have also been supportive of democracy in Myanmar. But what do you make now of the Trump administration's disengagement from Myanmar, defunding USAID, cutting refugee admissions, and now recently a travel ban in this moment?
Well, disastrous in a word of what the Trump administration has done. I mean, it's not about Myanmar, particularly though Myanmar has been swept up. And you mentioned the visa ban has been, specifically listed among a couple dozen countries. But it's generally kind of the new Trump administration's perspective on the world of destroying USAID, destroying the National Endowment for Democracy, all of our soft power tools of influence and engagement and support for those around the world who need it. And Myanmar is on the front lines of those who need it and deserve it, frankly. So what the Trump administration has done in the first 5-6 months has been absolutely disastrous. And I would commend, I saw it just this morning, David Matheson's piece, I think it's in Asia Times, where he lists exactly what's gone on systematically in recent months. I should also say, though, just to extend it further, to be fair, I don't think the Biden administration covered itself in glory in the final year or two. I understand in the early stages of the coup that it's very difficult to see where things were going to settle, that it was quite a fluid situation. And I think the envoy and Derek Chalet and all was very good on keeping tabs of what was going on, of keeping relationships going, et cetera. But as things started to settle, say over the past year or year and a half, that was the time for, as I think as someone has suggested, the U.S. should have been leaning much further forward and been much more proactively engaged on trying to shape the environment. And it gets back to the issue of China. Though it's not simply a China matter, but certainly the Myanmar people, one of the reasons I believe that they sought to reach out to the United States 10, 15 years ago was concerned about overweening Chinese influence in the country. Just like all Southeast Asian countries, they want balance. They want choices. As suggested, the Chinese are inevitable. I mean, they're on the border and they have influence and interests, and they will assert those in Myanmar. But the people of Myanmar want the United States and want other countries engaged excuse me, to balance the Chinese influence in the country. So there's much more that ASEAN can do. There's much more the United States can do, that Japan can do, that India could do. ASEAN has been disappointing and unfortunately maybe true to the expectations of ASEAN. I'm not sure people had high expectations. ASEAN would do more than it has. But individual ASEAN countries have done things. Singapore has done some things that have been very helpful on weapons and on banking. Indonesia has stepped up. Malaysia has been interested. But I really, and this is something that's been pressed in the United States for some time, and I've been pushing since essentially day one after the coup, was we not only need a special rep or special envoy like I was early on in 2011, but it shouldn't be based in Washington. There should be somebody based in the region. And the United States should be corralling all the different countries, talking to the different capitals. They all have different interests. India has different interests than Japan, has different interests than Thailand, and different interests than Malaysia or Indonesia. But there are common interests there that they all want to see, a common vision. But there's no leadership in that effort. And I think the United States ought to be engaged in leaning forward and doing that. And again, Trump himself is not going to do that. I think the key is to keep it below the level of the president. But the State Department can quietly send somebody out there. Marco Rubio gets this, I think, quietly. This is not a major issue for the Trump administration. The issues of China and rare earths can get their attention strategically if the humanitarian issues don't get their attention strategically. But there are common interests in humanitarian assistance, of stability in the country, of a peaceful resolution. And I think we need to have better contacts with the future of the country, which is outside in, with the ethnic organizations. You know, I agree with Thitinan, the NUG is important, but they're not necessarily the future of the country. I don't think that's the vision of the future. The future is happening on the ground with the ethnic realities. We need to understand who they are, build trust, build coalitions, help them talk to each other, and try to balance, not to push China out, because it's not about us or China, but to give an alternative, and hopefully China would have to deal with a different coalition of interests that are actually interested in Myanmar interests, of the people's interest in the country, rather than what China is doing, which is its own interest, which is, you know, really not about Myanmar, but about itself.
Great, thank you. And so Ambassador Mitchell did touch on ASEAN and their inability to bring an end to the conflict or really come up with sort of any meaningful action, according to some viewers. So to talk to Dr. Pongsudhirak, I would like to hear sort of your view on ASEAN. Is there anything more that this regional organization could be doing to bring a quicker end to the conflict? Or does the war in Myanmar just prove that ASEAN's non-interference policy makes it not necessarily the right actor to respond to regional conflict?
The ASEAN way and the non-interference cardinal rule has actually been modified on Myanmar. I mentioned it's unprecedented that ASEAN has really banned or sanctioned the Myanmar junta leader from joining the ASEAN leaders meetings, the summits, and this is still in place. Beyond that, they have not been able to implement the 5-point consensus because, you know, basically the 5-point consensus is calling for the cessation of violence, some dialogue, and for the ASEAN envoy to talk to different parties and find a way forward. And General Min Aung Hlaing signed on to it, but he has basically violated it and he's not abiding by it. So ASEAN is at a loss. This is all I can do for the moment. I think that beyond this, what ASEAN can do is to maybe, you know, next year we have Philippines in the lead as ASEAN chair. And I think that, you know, some of the agenda will be diverted to China, the Philippine confrontation with China and South China Sea. And then after that, Singapore. Singapore has been at the forefront of taking the junta in Myanmar to task. Basically, ASEAN is divided on Myanmar. On one side, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, and Thailand up to a point, they want to see some kind of a restoration of democratic rule and dialogue. The other side, the other countries, the other member states, they kind of take a muted stance. So moving forward, I think that we have to be careful about not allowing a fait accompli to happen in Myanmar that goes against the people's will. And the front and center the chief fait accompli that they will try is to have an election later this year in December or maybe early next year, and then to pretend that all is fine. And China will go along with that, because for China, as long as they ensure their interests, whatever government is in power in Naypyidaw, China can deal with, as long as their interests are maintained. So this is why I think the cohesion, there's a question in the Q&A that, the cohesion of the resistance coalition has to be brokered, has to be built, and there has to be some dialogue between the NUG, the ethnic armies, the ethnic army leaders, and the PDF, part of the NUG. And, they haven't really begun. So I think this is where the next frontier that, the next bridge that we have to cross to build a new kind of Myanmar beyond the junta. So the junta really, I think, to me, is kind of the days are numbered, but they're being propped up because there's no alternative. Finding a viable alternative, very difficult, because it's a very ethnically mixed country. The terrain is mountains and the low flat land, very difficult with the ethnic armies in the mountains, and then the ethnic armies are very diverse and so on. The conditions that led to the 2011 compromise, very difficult to come against. But somehow we need some kind of leadership, some kind of could also be from outside. I mean, for President Trump's second term, if they don't care about democracy, that's understandable from Trump. And if they want to cut down the bureaucracy, that's also fine, defunding. But they can think about China and rare earths. It might be their interest in Washington to maybe be a player to somehow help foster and foment a new kind of Myanmar that can come out of this, based on the diverse resistance coalition.
Great, thank you. So I'll just get one more quick question on ASEAN before we turn to the questions in the Q&A. So Nyantha, just from your viewpoint, more internal to Myanmar, what options do you think remain for ASEAN in the face of battlefield deadlock and deepening international disengagement from Myanmar and distraction away from Myanmar?
Yeah, I think just to Thithinan's point, just to add on to that very quickly, ASEAN still has convening power, right? Past chairs have done, I would say, a very good job of trying to bring out key political actors and representatives from the resistance. And I will not speak to what they've done to try to bring actors out from Naypyidaw. But certainly, in a multi-actor, multifaceted, multi-ethnic landscape of these disparate resistance actors, it has been immensely helpful being able to get them out and to speak on their own terms. I'm going to push back a little bit on some of what Ambassador Mitchell and Jay's points in terms of the fractious nature. There has been dialogue, right, as I've mentioned early on, and the NUG and some of this emergent political apparatus from this period has been not up to always up to the demands of the job. Mary, I see in the comments, had a really good question about some of the laws they've chosen to focus on and pass during such a period. But nevertheless, it is a interim political center. The function of the NUG is to provide that center. One of the things we cannot ignore is that we often talk about Myanmar in terms of ethnic diversity, and certainly there are a plethora of political and armed actors that have claimed representative power over various minority communities that have great relevance. But then there's also a large part of the country that I don't think it's sufficient to describe as just the Bama majority, right? Because that also ascribes a kind of unified ethnic-based identity to that majority. It's much more complex than that. It's urbane. It's connected. It is the population that did not face the most severe effects of military rule over the past 60 plus years. They have benefited from access to the infrastructure of a central state, even as they were repressed and suppressed by it, but nowhere on the level that I think the periphery has suffered. And for that population, as expressed, through the vote in 2020 that Dr. Thitinan alluded to at the beginning, how you keep them at the table, how you keep them committed to a political solution. The only way, in my view, is through a common political platform. The NUG will have to evolve, right? It will have to transform. What it is right now, to me, is an interim governance structure of sorts. But more than anything, it's an interim representative instrument with convening power to get to be able to bring together some of the disparate ethnic-based political and armed actors to the same table. And they may not have the same kind of battlefield presence or claims of victory, but I don't think that's the value. The real value is in external representation. For one, I think there's a declining marginal value on that, as I remain quite pessimistic about what international intervention can do beyond the what I mentioned at the start of ASEAN's ability to convene them. And to convene them, I think that center, the table that they sit around, and the discussion would be on how the NUG and its associated apparatus, the NUCC, maybe CRPH to an extent, transforms itself, right, to be much more inclusive, to be much more representative. I just to be clear, I completely agree that it is the ethnic-based actors on the ground that are doing the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. They've done this for decades, and they're doing this now on an unprecedented scale. It's not just about ethnic diversity. If you look at how provisional administration is taking place in large parts of Karenni, where most of the military has been cleared out, it's all women, right? It's young. It's completely dynamic. It's very creative. It's truly inspiring in terms of what governance and a public sector could look like. It's such a shame it has to take place during in the midst of war. But nevertheless, how you bring those ground actors and those identity-based or geographically based and siloed, I have to say, interests to the same table, you still need a center, right? And I think the convening center, if there's one thing the NUG can do or is left for it to do, it is to provide that convening center.
Thank you. So I know we've started to touch on some of the questions in our Q&A box, but I'll just bring a few of them to the forefront. We have a question here from Keith Fitzgerald that aligns a bit with what you were just talking about, Nyantha, about cohesion in the resistance. So I'll turn to Ambassador Mitchell. How would you assess the prospects for unity among Myanmar's main resistance groups, including EAOs, NUG Aligned, and the NUG PDFs, and the other groups that we've touched on in this discussion? What's the potential for unity in a post-conflict situation, or even in the current situation now?
Well, I mean, look, I'm not going to challenge what Nyantha said about that. There's certainly coordination going on. There's more than there has been in the past. You see that in the efforts and the armed efforts. And there's even comments by some of the leaders, the ethnic leaders, saying, we've learned from 75 years or 80 years of this, that we can't do this on our own. We have to do this with partners inside the country. We can't just be siloed by ethnicity. So that's a positive trend, and that's ongoing. It's a work in progress. I mean, the mistrust is deep within the society, among the societies. There are issues of territory. There are issues of all kinds of issues, cultural issues and historical issues. But it's starting to happen. I would say one thing, though, that I think there is a role for the international community very much in all of this. If for no other reason to ensure that whatever result is, or whatever process for a final result is, as the ASEANs have put this repeatedly in a recent statement. They talk about it as Myanmar owned, Myanmar led. Over and over and over, they say Myanmar owned, Myanmar led. That's exactly the right way to look at this. And I wonder if they put that in there because they're looking at what China is doing in the country. If it is left simply to the course of things as it is now, where China is filling a vacuum and they are able to determine who's up, who's down, and nothing happens there without the Chinese giving a thumbs up or thumbs down, they have no interest in the Myanmar people. They have no interest in Myanmar as a country. They're interested in Myanmar as a source of resources, access to the Indian Ocean, keep the West out, their own security, and their own sphere of influence. So you have to have in my view, folks on the outside working with those on the inside who recognize this challenge, that without a certain degree of unity, not the unity imposed by the military, which was a false unity, but a true unity of effort, of conversation, of dialogue, they're going to have to live side by side. That's just, they have to do it. So I think the international community, if done right, if the right forces there are enabling a Myanmar-led, Myanmar-owned process, and that has to start now because facts on the ground are starting to coalesce. And I think that's where the United States, where Japan, where ASEAN countries can step in. And that's where countries like Thailand and India are folks that are still holding on to the idea that the future is somehow central, a strong center where the junta has a role. They have to get on board and realize where things are moving, not where things have been.
Great, thank you. So we're coming up on time, but to end on sort of a forward-looking note, I'll turn to you, Dr. Pongsudhirak. As we've mentioned, Min Aung Hlaing has said that an election will take place either in December of this year or January 2026. And based on a question we have in the Q&A, what should we expect if the regime is able to execute an election? How will ASEAN respond? And what can the international community do to play a constructive role?
Yes, there's also a few questions about Thailand's role. I just very quickly say that Thailand, I think that I don't agree with the direction of Thai foreign policy, bilateral policy with Myanmar over the past decade, especially with this government engaging Min Aung Hlaing. I think they want to be expedient. They want a peaceful border, maybe some stability because of the scam centers, the trafficking of drugs and transnational crimes and so on. But I think the opposition party in Thailand that actually won the election but was denied power, denied office, they have the right kind of agenda for Myanmar relations with Thailand and also within ASEAN. It's more progressive outlook about Myanmar, kind of returning to the decade of promise and reform and progress. But for the election, I think that it has to be very clear that this would be a sham election. It has to be preempted. If there's any idea that the election can make a fait accompli and lend some legitimacy to the SAC, they'll be incentivized to have elections, and China will go for it because that will get them over this hump. But I think the international community and ASEAN has to make it very clear that this election, any kind of election under these conditions, cannot be legitimate and credible. It'll be a sham election, and therefore don't even think about it until conditions change, until it's more inclusive, until it's broad-based, until conditions on the ground change, that people can actually express their voice and their collective will.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Even though it's not the most hopeful note to end on, I really appreciate all of your support talking about the conflict and discussing the different pieces at play. So I'll say thank you so much to all of our speakers who joined us and all of the participants who tuned in to this webinar. I personally hope to see a cessation of the conflict soon, but as we discussed today, there are so many complex factors at play. So thank you all so much for tuning in today.